everybody, and welcome back to What's the Story podcast. My name is Danny Murray.
And I am Graham Merrigan. How are you, Danny? How have you been? I haven't seen you or spoke to you. We haven't spoken about 6 months. Or sorry, 6 weeks. So I don't know how you are, or I'm only joking.
Yeah, no, I'm back. It's good to be back, man.
Back for a week.
back for a week, then on holidays again. But look, that's the podcast business, Graham. That's how it works now. There's too many out there, which is great in one sense, but also the market is oversaturated. So,
that's our excuse.
That's our excuse, and we're sticking to it. We've got lives. We just do our own thing now. It's not like years ago.
Go at our own pace.
But yeah, look, it's been good, man. Yeah, last time we spoke, I was heading off my holidays. Holidays being and gone. Life was
a great time.
I did, yeah. Went on some roller coasters. Absolutely ruined me underwear in the process. But it was great fun all the time.
Did you go on the rocket in Universal?
No.
Where you pick your song?
No, I didn't get to do the rocket because
Howard.
when we queued up for
Howard.
it, will you let me explain, Graham?
Sorry.
If you will, please. Will you let me finish, please?
Yeah.
Let me finish, please.
Coward.
It was suspended due to lightning in the area.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I was raging. I did do Hulk. I done the Velocicoaster, the Jurassic Park one, and that was, honest to God, man, the best. And if my wife's listening, I'm sorry, but that was the best 60 seconds of my life.
The Hulk amazing though.
Oh, the Hulk's deadly. No, the Hulk was there.
Me and Carl went on the Hulk in the dark, and it was amazing.
Ah, class. Yeah, that would be good now. Yeah.
Me and Jenzer went on what's it called again? I always get the name.
The Riptide Rocket.
Riptide Rocket. Me and my mother sat in the front row for Riptide Rocket.
Ah, deadly.
Yeah, and just as we were taking off, my mother Jenzer was like, "Oh my God, am I on? Is this working? Am I this is loose." Turned away to give it a bit of looseness, a bit of give, and sure we were halfway up the yoke, and I was like, "Ma'am, no looking back now."
That's it. You're in it.
I sabotage from my song.
Nice.
You weren't on it, so.
Oh, what was no? As I said, we were myself. It was myself and Jono actually were in the queue, and then the siren went up for lightning in the area, and the ride was suspended. And I checked the weather app real quick, and the forecast was for thunder and lightning in the area for the next 2 hours. I was like, I'm not standing here for 2 hours. So, but yeah, it was good. It was. We went.
Did you only go to Universal once?
No, we were there for I think it was we done one park one day, one park another day, kind of, you know what I mean? Like we were there for, I think, 3 days in total in Universal.
Right.
We done the Halloween Horror Nights.
Deadly, I loved it. I know you didn't really like it, or you didn't like the queuing, but I can appreciate that. The queuing is, you need to have patience, but I thought it was one of the best experiences of my life.
The visuals and the characters and all that were absolutely amazing. They were absolutely, I have to say, from that point of view, and just walking around the place with the special effects and all, deadly. But the queues, it was just stupid. It was less of a queue during the day to go on even the Harry Potter roller coasters, which are the ones that are the biggest queue times and all that.
Yeah.
But, look, great holiday. Really enjoyed it. I've already got onto a builder to see about how I get a swimming pool put into my garden here in Portlaoise. 2 weeks living in a gaff for a swimming pool, man, just changes you know.
Yeah.
So my neighbours aren't too happy about me wandering around in a Speedo, but listen, Florida changed me. So, but yeah, come here very quickly, and we're kind of on point for what we're talking about. Did you watch the Beckham documentary?
I did.
What did you make of it?
I enjoyed it as I was watching it. It was nostalgic. It was.
Yeah.
I liked David Beckham as a footballer. I thought he was an excellent footballer. I thought I like Netflix. I like Netflix documentaries. I like their programming. A lot of the time, my criticisms of Netflix is that some of their documentaries are an episode too long, and I just felt the Beckham one was an episode too long.
It felt like it could have been
quite repetitive.
I think what I didn't like about it, and I get it, I get why it wasn't, but I would have liked it to have been a little bit tougher on him.
Yeah, well, it was a PR piece.
It was, and it gets weird because he comes across very likable. He comes across a nice guy, but then I'm kind of also like, his. I mean, they kind of touched on the affair issue and his infidelity.
But they touched on it, but you're kind of still left. I text you and I text Brock and I said, "Are we to take that, David Brock, not Mark?
Yeah.
Are we to take it that he did it or he didn't?"
But it's not just the one issue with Rebecca Luce, which was the one that they heavily alluded to. But there's been lots of stories of infidelity, and I don't know if he did or not.
Has there been lots of stories of infidelity?
Oh yeah, there's lots.
Well, I thought it was just Rebecca Luce.
No, wasn't there a story with him on a stag do? And there was the whole thing with Australian strippers, and there's lots of them over the years. And again, for legal reasons, I will be clear, I have no proof whatsoever. He may or may not have engaged in it. He says he hasn't, and I have to take that at face value. But there's plenty of other stories out there if you want to Google it. But also, I just thought
I would have liked if maybe he been asked about his arrangement with Qatar.
Exactly what I was
considering. Like he was a cover boy, a cover man, so to speak, for a gay magazine, and there's no gay rights in Qatar.
But like this is my thing with it, right? He gets wheeled out in Qatar for everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the F1 is in Qatar. David Beckham is there. There's a bit of football in Qatar. They open a Starbucks in Qatar. David Beckham is there. Like he is.
It wasn't mentioned at all.
Nothing at all mentioned about it, and I just thought that was interesting because he's obviously on a wedge from them.
Yeah.
And it just with the World Cup and everything else, and it just felt a bit kind of like they're not. It
felt like one episode too long, and then when you could have used there was 4 episodes. It was 1 episode too long. For your 4th episode, you actually could have just asked them about Qatar. Yeah. You could have asked them about the criticism, the Joe Lissett stuff, comedian Joe Lissett's addressing you. Like, I just why ignore it? Like, it's out there. You're trying to do this expose documentary, never seen before documentary, doesn't shy away from certain topics type of documentary, but in actual fact, it didn't touch the topics. A lot of people don't give a shit about it, but I mean, I was expecting it to be brought up at least, and I was expecting for him to deal with it poorly, but as I was still expecting for him to take the box and bring it up.
I was the same. I did think that would happen, and then it didn't. And then I noticed as well how they didn't touch on his spoiled brat attitude around not being awarded a knighthood. That's conveniently washed out of history.
Exactly,
well,
yeah.
But look.
Having said that as well, like I thought he was disgracefully treated after the World Cup in '98, and
absolutely,
back, like I remember at the time being infuriated by it, to be like to treat someone like that. I thought that treatment was absolutely disgraceful. And when you go retrospectively back on British tabloid journalism in the 90s and early 90s, when you look at the George Michael documentary on Channel 4 where they outed him, and the disgraceful harassment, the harassment that Beckham's had for a sending off, like, and then Glenn Hoddle as manager, basically blaming Beckham for not progressing in the World Cup.
Am I also right in saying, and I'm jumping a little bit here, didn't Glenn Hoddle make some absolutely outrageous remarks about people with disabilities?
People like me. Yeah, he said people like me did wrong in a previous life to be dealt with this hand in their existing life. And
yet...
And he gets full-time work all the time. He's always on TNT. Yeah. He's always commentating. He's an absolute bellend.
A bit of a flute.
Remember he brought your one island jury into the English camp to heal them?
But no.
Do you not remember that?
No.
That's where he got... I believe that's where he got his ideology about disabled people.
That's insane.
I believe he got a lot of his beliefs from her and thinking, people with disabilities, they must have done wrong in a previous life to get the hand that they were dealt with.
It's outrageous. He
wasn't cancelled. He wasn't cancelled.
He wasn't. I would like to I like to try and give people the benefit of the doubt, and I hope that he no longer holds those views and that he's a little bit older and wiser.
He's
But
never asked, does he have?
I was going to say, but nobody's putting those questions to him. So I guess we'll have to wait with bated breath for the answer on that one.
Yeah.
But speaking of sport being a bit of
Qatar.
a tip and Qatar and all those things, our guest this week is investigative journalist and writer Karim Zidan. And Karim specialises in that murky water that is where the world of sport, power, politics, and all those things intertwine. And he's going to give
He's
us...
at the intersection of sports, power, and politics.
That's the one. That's the blurb from his website?
Just from his Twitter bio.
Well, there you go. That's why he's the writer and I'm not, because that's how you phrase these things, rather than me rambling incoherently, looking for words in the dark. Graham, looking for words in the dark.
That's it.
Anyway, enough of me, enough of you. Let's get to the man who knows what he's talking about. The wonderful Karim Zidan. Karim, thanks for your time, man. Do appreciate it.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
And you're a very brave man, Karim. I think that's fair to say in your work.
I think over the years, people have said that to me regularly, especially back when I used to go do all these trips to Russia. Honestly, I think I look back on it, and a lot of it I just chalk up to being young and stupid, You're just so much more willing to do things and you don't think of consequences then, truth be told, right? But I mean, with that being said, I don't think I'd change anything I've done or anything I've written in the past. So maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot we want to try to get through, but I suppose you've touched on Russia kind of nice and early. So we'll start there, because in many ways it's still quite topical, but also just when you watch it all unfold, your experience being there, how do you see the psyche of the Russian people in terms of what's going on with your lived experience being there?
So I caught a lot of flack at the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. When Russia first invaded Ukraine, there was immediately the significant backlash against Russia, which is completely understandable. I mean, Putin is a warmonger, and it should be stated as such. Absolutely. But the problem is that a lot of that reaction spilled over to the Russian people itself and citizens who don't really have much of a say. I mean, I grew up in Egypt, where you don't really have voting rights. Your opinions as a citizen means absolutely nothing. The Egyptian state was going to do whatever it felt like doing. And I mean, we had a revolution and it got us nowhere. So this whole idea that, you can suddenly protest and remove Putin and whatnot. I was there when Russians would take to the streets to protest, and guess what? They were arrested in thousands, and nobody looked after the ones who were arrested. People just had to face jail time. So there has always been significant Russian opposition. When I used to go visit Russia, I mean, I did this for years, just for your listeners to know, I was in Russia regularly between 2014 and 2017 doing commentary, actually, for a Russian MMA promotion called M1 Global. And I was one of their English commentators at the time, working alongside Ian Freeman, a UFC legend, actually. So I was there quite a bit, but a lot of the Russians I spoke to were against the war. At this point, there was no war, so to say, but they were against the incursions into the Donbass. They were against the annexation of Crimea. This wasn't something that was unanimously supported by Russians. I understand that over the years, things have changed and the propaganda has been just so overwhelming. The backlash against Russians has led to this sort of repositioning of some fascist roots in there and some ultra-nationalist ideas, but that doesn't spread to the entire population in my eyes. I mean, I was there sitting down at tables having dinner with Ukrainians and Russians discussing, what's happening right now in Ukraine, and they were having very reasonable discussions at the time. This idea that everybody, that the country is just full of fascists and warmongers is something I still to this day can't buy. It's the same argument that will be made against me as an Egyptian one day. If Egypt was to take a decision militarily or something, why am I being held responsible for that decision, right? So
we see it now. We see it now, present day, with the whole, and I'm jumping a bit, but the whole Israel-Palestine conflict. Mm-hmm. The Benjamin Netanyahu government aren't representative of the people. I mean, you look at the Jewish organizations who are demanding for peace, demanding for ceasefires. There was victims of, the October 7th, where victims lost family, and they're pleading with Benjamin Netanyahu, not in my name. So we see this all over the world. with stuff like that, and it's all the same. It roots in kind of a bit of a fascism, bit of ultra orthodox in the religion, and where does it go? But sorry for cutting across you, but it is the kind of similar into present day stuff as well.
It is absolutely similar. You know what's really disappointing is seeing something like early on at the start, right after the tragedy that occurred on October 7th, you had Volodymyr Zelensky coming out and comparing the incursion into Israel to that of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is just that is a troubling statement in many ways, because it suggests a lack of awareness generally. The comparison between the Palestinian people to a nuclear power like Russia is beyond absurd, right? And it's dehumanizing. It's extremely dangerous rhetoric at the same time. So that's what's disappointing here. We seem to be at a stage right now very similar to at the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where we have an extreme amount of tribalism on both sides. This is such a polarized topic, and it has long been a polarized topic. The conflict between Israel and Palestine, but right now the level of tribalism, people simply aren't willing to talk in human terms. I mean, I put out a statement a few days ago, just simply calling for an end to genocide and saying that this simply cutting off water and electricity. These are war crimes. That there is no justification, there's no forgiveness for such things. And that statement, I caught backlash for that, despite condemning all the violence on both sides. It's like people refuse to see this idea that no innocent civilians being killed as a reasonable statement. It's not to them. There clearly seems to still be this sort of justification taking place, and that's a very dangerous time to be in.
Absolutely. It's and as you said, it's clear war crimes, and it's deplorable that we see, from a European perspective, Ursula von der Leyen, who almost a year to the day was saying about Russia cutting off electricity or targeting power supplies and water supplies against the Ukrainian people. And then she's doing a guided tour with the Israeli Defense Force and not willing to call them out on doing the exact same actions that she called out a year previously. It's alarming. And I think the one thing everybody hopefully can agree on is that it can't continue, and the loss of civilian life, the loss of innocent life, is not worth anything like what we've been seeing over the last 2 weeks.
The problem is how much death are we going to witness on both sides before people come to that conclusion, before people finally start to backtrack, right?
That's how much death is proportionate. I mean, a child dying
we've already seen
in Gaza, Palestine every 15 minutes. That's okay
Absolutely.
for Joe Biden. That's okay for Uncle Joe to sign the checks.
You see him slowly starting to backtrack, though, making statements like I saw earlier saying we have to remember that most Palestinians are not Hamas and they're simply innocent civilians. Oh, finally, after what, it's been a week or so, right? Like now you've decided that it's okay to say this. Are you kidding me?
The most disturbing aspect of his visit there was he couldn't look into the camera. He couldn't look his eyes into the camera. He was messing with his hands, and he was saying, I saw the footage, and he's kind of in the direction of Netanyahu, and he's like, it was the other team that did it. The other team. This isn't the Super Bowl. This is people's lives, and you're describing them as the other team. It's absolutely bizarre.
Now, you hear statements like this, right? And here's how I view this. I've been writing about the intersection of sports and politics with a heavy focus on authoritarian regimes over the years, and part of that was due to the belief that democracies are the ones who have at least a rule of law, an understanding of human rights, and the willingness to protect those human rights, right? What have we seen of such in the past couple of weeks, right? It's really, really troubling situation, because now all these supposed moral arbitrators, right? England, France, Canada, the United States, supposed. I mean, of course, theoretically, it's been a joke for forever, right? These are all long-term hypocrites, but we're really seeing the extent of that hypocrisy right now, right? This whole idea of never again with the Holocaust, clearly that just applied to some people, not everybody. That's really upsetting, and it's upsetting for me, who tries to reckon with the impact of politics in sports and where I'm supposed to be focusing my attention. And it's hard to see I'll give you an example. I've been doing so much reporting lately on Saudi Arabia, and I'm proud of all the reporting I've been doing, because Saudi Arabia, at the end of the day, while there have been reforms, there have been changes taking place in the country, it's important to know the amount of repression that is still there, and the fact that it's a complete autocracy. It's a constituency of one, and it's Mohammed bin Salman's country to rule, right? At the end of the day, that's not a healthy environment in the long term. I firmly believe this. I've lived in multiple authoritarian regimes. Yet then you get the topsy-turvy reality of Saudi Arabia being the one foreign ministry that actually releases a very firm statement yesterday, following, or just recently, following the bombings that took place at the hospital in Gaza that killed 500 people. Saudi Arabia was one of the only countries that has actually put out a harsh and firm statement. How do you reckon with stuff like this, right?
I know
Those coming from Western democracies.
Yeah, and when it intertwines with sport, you're kind of going, I mean, with Saudi Arabia, the first kind of, now you correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert, but the first time we've seen in the last 5 to 6 years of normalization in terms of Western sports and Western culture, it seemed to have been the deal with the WWE, with Vince McMahon's company, Professional Wrestling in America, signed a 10-year deal with the Saudi government to bring their product over. And at the start, the women's wrestlers weren't allowed to participate.
Mm-hmm.
Then they were allowed to participate in full. They had to cover their bodies. And now it's evolved. And it seems to evolve every show, premium live event that they do. But I watch professional wrestling. I have watched some of those events in Saudi. When I'm watching it, this is the thing. Like, am I to think about this one constituent state? Am I to think about, what happens if you're gay over there? And it's like what we see with the English Premier League. Sorry, my question there was the WWE the first kind of entertainment sports contract that Saudi Arabia signed?
It was certainly one of the first, and I'd say it was the most significant at the time, right? The Saudi Arabia had already had a very basic deal with the WWE. They had already gone for a couple of events, if I'm not mistaken, before, Mohammed bin Salman started implementing Vision 2030. But once he did, and he appointed Turki al-Sheikh to the head of the sports authority at the time, which would later become the Ministry of Sports, that was one of his first big missions, was bringing in the WWE. It was seen as a family-friendly show where Saudi Arabia would be able to present this, reformed, modernized nation, where you'd be able to see in an auditorium or a stadium, instead of actually just seeing men, you'll be able to see families, you'll see women, you'll see children, and it's softening the brand image that Saudi Arabia had at the time.
Sportwashing.
Of course, well, it's sports washing, and especially then, I would argue that sports washing really was the key driver of a lot of what Saudi Arabia was doing. So really, a lot of this begins with WWE. Sure, certainly did have some events in Saudi Arabia before Mohammed bin Salman began implementing Vision 2030, but it all really changed and developed significantly once Vision 2030 really became the master plan that Saudi Arabia was moving forward with in 2016. He appoints Turki al-Sheikh at the time to the head of the sports authority in Saudi Arabia, which would later become the Ministry of Sports. And WWE was one of those first big ventures at the time. Why? Because it was an opportunity to present this really family-friendly show. And it really was a opportunity to soften Saudi Arabia's brand and really present some sports washing out of this, right? That was really Saudi Arabia's aim at the time. If you think about it, this was at the time where Mohammed bin Salman was on this reform tour of the United States and of the UK, etc., speaking with all these big media entities, meeting with politicians. All these articles were being written about, here's the great reformer coming to change Saudi Arabia. And WWE actually played into that quite well, in a way that, say, the Formula One wouldn't have been able to at the time. With the WWE, apart from the fact that you have a scripted show that you can control and really create, an entertainment branch of propaganda right before your eyes, it also is an opportunity to show a stadium filled with, women, families, children, a much, softer image of Saudi Arabia, especially to the West, which would have just been used to an utterly male-dominated society. So it really, I think, was very, very useful at the time having the WWE. And yes, it was one of the first big projects that Saudi Arabia has. I'd say it's taken a a step back since then. Like at this point now, Saudi Arabia has invested in so much, and they have really achieved much bigger boons since then. I think that improving their domestic league, bringing in Cristiano Ronaldo and Neymar, these are bigger names than anything the WWE has to offer. Of course, at the end of the day, right? The fact that they're about to host potentially and really very likely will host the 2034 World Cup, right? These are all big successes that Saudi Arabia has been able to achieve. But there is absolutely a very significant, understated, and underreported link between the rise of Saudi Arabia's sports washing strategy and the WWE. Absolutely. So that's a great thing to point out there.
It's fascinating as well when you think about this in the context of just using sport as a way to kind of as like it's sport washing, but that idea that millions of people around the world are going to tune into this. So how do we make it look like
normal?
We're progressive. We're all these things, and it's fascinating. And like I'm a big Formula One fan, and when I heard about the Grand Prix going to Jeddah, I instantly thought, all right, F1 doesn't exactly have a great reputation in terms of promoting women in the first place, and now this, and F1. I mean, like F1's in Qatar, another example of how, but it's
in Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, yeah, exactly. The Baku Grand Prix.
I actually saw it in Baku quite a few years ago now, maybe sometime in 2015. I think I caught it in Baku. I caught the Formula One. I used to live in Bahrain, and Bahrain was the first country in the Middle East to get the Formula One. And I went for the first couple of years to it, and I attended it long before I even knew what sports washing was or what was happening. I mean, I was 14 years old at the time, 13, something like that, and. I mean, yeah, like you said, Formula One doesn't exactly have the best reputation when it comes to the countries it chooses to deal with. So Saudi Arabia really wasn't exceptional, really, when it came to the Formula One in my eyes. I mean, they already had relationships with some very, very questionable regimes up to that point.
It's incredible how Formula One over the last sort of 15 years has grown exponentially, but the ties to those authoritarian regimes, and as you said, Bahrain being the first one, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and it's Baku. And don't get me wrong, like these Grand Prix often do look incredible on TV. The Baku Grand Prix, the mixture of the track going through the old city and everything, the visuals are amazing. Factor that in with the fact that they then tend to have a big concert with, a global superstar headliner. All these things combine to make it seem like I want to be there. I want to go there. That sounds like an amazing place to be. But it's underneath that sort of superficial layer, then you kind of go, why is it there? Why is the money for this so big in a place that probably wouldn't have been anywhere near Formula One? Like I can't imagine Saudi Arabia was bursting with F1 fans prior to this, and I can't imagine now looking at it, Saudi Arabia are overly happy when you've your Lewis Hamiltons and Sebastian Vettel before he retired, who are, they've got the rainbow flag on their helmet. They're doing little things like that to just try and say to people, we're here because
that's their little protest. But I would have said that about WWE events. And then when I've watched them, I mean, the crowd is loud. The crowd is there. They know what they're talking about. Although I think there was reports at the first ever show, they requested for former WWE champion Yokozuna to appear, and he's been for 15 years. So they did have a list of wrestlers they wanted to appear that had long passed away, and that was quite, lads, what he is doing here. So when I heard that report, I was thinking the same, Dan, that you were thinking about. Are they really F1 fans? Or are they really, if they're asking for Yokozuna, who died in 2000, are they still, are they actually wrestling fans?
It's fascinating how they've gone about doing it. And Karim, this is where I'd be really interested to get your take, because you rightly pointed out the fact that now they have their fingers in so many pies, with you've got football, a global sport. Okay, I can easily understand why they want to get into football, right? And I can easily understand, them throwing money at your Ronaldos, your Karim Benzema's, the Newcastle project, I mean, all this sort of stuff. Then you look at golf and you're kind of like, okay, all right, I can kind of see why they'd go after it. But it feels like they have very strategically put themselves into positions where they're going after different demographics and different audiences because they really want to capture as many eyeballs as possible.
There's no doubt about it. When we think about golf, I struggled with that one for a while, primarily because golf really has, since it's really an American pastime for the most part, there is a significant segment of the population in the States that's conservative, that's white and that loves golf. So that's also happens to be the demographic that didn't take kindly to Saudi Arabia and still holds the most, say, resentment to 9/11, whether, I mean, that's rightfully attributed to Saudi Arabia or not.
Yeah.
That's the position they have chosen to take, right? Which is why the PGA Tour at a certain point, and Jay Monahan, one of the things he did to sort of, counter Saudi's approach with Live Golf was to meet with all the 9/11 families, right? And release these statements saying the PGA is supportive of the 9/11 families and stands with them, etc. Right? I mean, that was your demographic. So you're feeding into that while Saudi was trying to cut through that perspective, right? This is where that sort of reputation laundering or brand management, whatever terms you want to use here, that's where that really applies very well, right? Saudi Arabia was trying to see where it can go here, where can it actually change the minds of these older Americans? And at the same time, can it apply its vast resources to bully another business, a really prominent American business? I mean, all this stuff, the PGA one is really interesting, Danny, I have to admit, because that also took place at an interesting geopolitical moment, I'd say, where Mohammed bin Salman and his foreign policy was really taking it to the United States. I mean, we're seeing right now that the US is still desperate to get into a good agreement with Saudi Arabia that includes a normalization deal with Israel, actually. So the timing right now is really, really terrible. Right. But this is basically one of Joe Biden's big foreign policy aims over the past couple of years, was setting a good deal with Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Mohammed bin Salman has just been throwing out absolutely ridiculous demands at the United States, demands that Saudi would never have attempted all these years ago, right? Had they still considered the US to be such a global hegemon. They would never have continued to raise oil prices the way they do, right? They have a complete disregard for what's occurring in the United States or what the US is trying to diplomatically relate to them. So I think the PGA is just another facet of that. It's where Mohammed bin Salman was able to say, hey, look at me, I've been able to take over an American pastime just like that, with a little bit of litigation by poaching some of the big players. That's all it took, right? It was a big statement, and I think that was a significant turning point in mainstream media and amongst sports fans in general, saying, oh shit, this is a real competitor here. We can absolutely see American sports leagues and organizations entirely wiped out or taken over, right? Because people like to call this a merger. There is nothing merger related about this. This was a hostile takeover. It was a hostile takeover. That's how these things are done. You're poaching players and forcing litigation, intimidating your stakeholders. Of course, that's a hostile takeover. That's how it works. We're going to now see whether this merger goes through, right? This is a big moment for the United States, I think. If regulatory bodies do not stand up to this, properly stand up to this and deny Saudi Arabia I cannot overstate how little Saudi actually invested in the Live Golf and all the money it's putting into sports in general to be able to achieve this right now, right? They're not even
little.
It's so little. It is so little, Graham, in comparison to what they're spending on everything else. Oh yeah, no doubt. Sports. First of all, when you think of Vision 2030, and I honestly encourage you guys to at some point go on the Public Investment Fund website, look up the Vision 2030, and see some of those PDF files that they have on there. You'll see that they've split their sort of parameters and their pillars, what they want to achieve, into sort of 13 sections. Sports isn't even its own section. It's in there with entertainment, right? And then you've got construction, you've got tourism, you've got investment, and all sorts of other facets. When you think of how much they've spent on, the giga projects like Neon, that super big, ultra modern, futuristic techno whatever city that they're intending to build out in the desert, that's like $500 billion, I think that's estimated, right? When you think of just how much they've actually invested into venture capital funds, as far as we can tell so far, there's more than $35 billion that have been spent, that have been invested into venture capital funds in the United States. We're talking all the big ones too, Sequoia, etc. And that's something people aren't talking about, right? Yet he's invested, let's average it out. Let's say let's just jump and say 15 billion. Well, that doesn't even match what he's invested in venture capital funds, right? It goes to show you it's a drop in the bucket for what Saudi's capable of. But at the same time, it also, I think, underscores why they focus on sports like this, because you can invest less in it and get far more attention, far more prestige, far more recognition, far more influence than by constructing something in your own desert. Eventually, that might
so
bring
is that what the payoff is? Is that what the payoff is? Recognition and like, I mean, if they're awarded the World Cup in 2034, are people going to say to FIFA, okay, you've awarded them, but do you know about them? Do you know that? I know people like yourself are doing that as we speak.
But sure, look at Qatar.
What's the response you're getting from FIFA like?
Well, I mean, it looks to me like FIFA has really, set this up for Saudi Arabia to achieve 2034, right? I mean, they basically locked out a bunch of the different confederations from even being able to challenge for 2034, right? They're basically trying to get Asia to just simply back Saudi Arabia instead of Australia, who hasn't even country that hasn't even placed the formal bids yet. And then you've got Oceania's left over, so New Zealand. I mean, there's barely any competition here, right? And so they've crammed like 6 countries hosting the 2030 World Cup in the most ridiculous situation I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it really lines up Saudi Arabia to achieve 2034 like it's nothing, right? To me, I see these major organizations, these major entities like FIFA and the IOC as complicit in the behaviors of authoritarian regimes in general, right? If not flat out encouraging this type of behavior. But here is really the big thing here, Graham, is that I don't really think by the time we get to 2034, we're going to be talking very much about, Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses, because in many ways, Saudi has already gone past that stage. Remember when I was talking about how we were really going beyond sports washing here, because at first it was about distracting from human rights abuses, which suggests that Saudi fears some sort of consequence, retribution, reaction from the Western world that would limit its ability to influence, right? That's no longer the case. As a matter of fact, Saudi Arabia is far more influential than the vast majority of other countries able to bid or compete in the world of sports. I mean, hell, combat sports, which is something Saudi Arabia is not even really that interested in, they are suddenly the epicenter of boxing. They're about to host the biggest heavyweight showdown, I think, in a generation at this point, right? If it actually goes through and we have Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, that's a humongous fight, and that's taking place not in Las Vegas, right? Not in, Abu Dhabi, which is setting itself up as well as a combat sports like epicenter, but no, it is Saudi Arabia. And they're doing that just on the side. That's a side thing, right? But they're also doing that while hosting, Riyadh Season, which is this big entertainment and cultural event aimed to bring in tourism. They are connecting all their projects together in a way I've never seen another country do, if I'm being honest with you, right? We've seen the UAE attempt it a little bit, but they're not as influential as Saudi Arabia, not in my opinion, at least. Saudi Arabia is aiming to use this to really achieve power and prestige and maintain global influence. And what comes with this power and global influence is this idea that even its staunchest critics now have no choice but to work with Saudi Arabia. So it's not going to matter at this point whether Saudi Arabia has committed human rights abuses. The success for Saudi is not hiding the abuses. It's being able to still host these events in spite of the abuses. And that's what it's achieving.
The great example of that is Ari Emanuel, who I mean, now in his role.
Who's Ari Emanuel, Danny, for our listeners?
So he's the top dog in the UFC WWE. I can't remember the name of it.
TKO.
It's like so. to rewind a couple of years,
he's already kicked out Vince McMahon from creative after a month, which is.
I mean, Vince has skeletons in his closet, and some of them aren't in the closet anymore. So, but he's an interesting cat, this guy. And you rewind a couple of years, and Karim, I'm almost certain you wrote about this as well, that he was kind of in bed with the Saudi Arabian regime. Then the despicable murder happened of Jamal Khashoggi, and Ari Emanuel went, I can't. And, he was, I believe he hired bodyguards at the time. He was that kind of nervous about withdrawing his support or whatever. fast forward to modern day, and this merger happens, and suddenly he's in a position here again where UFC and WWE, and as we've just been discussing, the fact that WWE are, almost like the flag carrier in many ways for the family entertainment piece in Saudi Arabia. So it's, as you said, it's interesting who people who might be vocal critics or might be unwilling to work with them now have to work with them.
Oh, absolutely. I think you really mentioned an interesting point. It's another one of those situations that I would consider a turning point, really, because Saudi Arabia had gone through such a massive effort to present itself as a reformed nation. And then the assassination, honestly, let's call it what it is, the dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi occurs, right? And that was a significant setback to Mohammed bin Salman's image, right? His enhanced image. To this day, I think if there's one thing that continues to saddle his image of being presented flat out as a reformer, it's the memory that he okayed the dismembering of a journalist, basically, who was barely a dissident, barely a true dissident in comparison to what human rights activists say about the country, etc. He really was a moderate, let's put him that way, right? And still, that's what Mohammed bin Salman chose to do. And if there was going to be a moment for sports and for organizations and for corporations to turn against Saudi Arabia or to turn on Saudi Arabia, it was going to be that moment, right? It was going to be that moment. And Ari Emanuel, in the first and only time in his life, chose to take moral action rather than capitalistic action, right? First and only time he's ever done this. It's completely out of character for Ari Emanuel. If you read his entire history, it's completely out of character. Right? So he actually does that, steps back from Saudi Arabia, thinking that the rest of the people are going to follow, and nobody does. Nobody follows whatsoever. And he's left sitting back, watching as the gold rush taking place in Saudi Arabia and all these different corporations capitalizing on that. And he's sitting back saying, well, what has my morality, brought for me, right? What has it done for me lately? So of course, when he got the opportunity to jump back into this again, whether it be, through let's just say through the TKO merger that occurred between the WWE and the UFC, there was really no doubt that he was going to okay this behavior. I wrote about it at the time. As soon as this merger was announced, I said it's a matter of time. Within a year, I expect the UFC, which Ari owns as well, to host its first event in Saudi Arabia. Absolutely. Lo and behold, I think maybe 10 months after I wrote that article, it's going to take place in March 2024. We're going to see the very first UFC event in Saudi Arabia, also as part of Riyadh season. Everything is connected, right? So they're going there. It's part of, we can call it, Saudi sports washing strategy. We can call it part of its greater sports strategy, or even just an act of tourism as well, right? So there's so many layers to what they're doing. And Ari Emanuel is now going to be just the latest in a long list of people who will continue to capitalize. But I have one more thing I want to say. There's also, I think I sometimes, in telling this story or liking to reference this Jamal Khashoggi incident and how the UFC, or how the WWE was really crucial at that point in sort of insisting, no, we're going to still hold an event there, and which sort of was sort of a crossing of the Rubicon. There was really no going back for the WWE from there. But you know what? Nobody held it against them. The WWE was still able to operate both in the United States and elsewhere, and other corporations ended up following suit. Right. So this is really a great way to show you that this is just how Saudi Arabia operates, unfortunately. All it takes is one person to say, oh, you know what? I'm doing this for the money anyway, and we're going to go, and the media is going to let go of this story eventually. And that's exactly what happened there, right? But I don't know. It's one of those really depressing topics when we think about it, because there could have been a legitimate reaction over Jamal Khashoggi. And instead, there was a bit of outcry, right? Which is what we hear generally all the time. When a topic becomes trendy on social media, etc., there's outcry. People, voice their resentment, or they rant or they rage for a little while, and then they forget about it and they move on. And that's exactly what these corporations expect. And I think they are too tied in bed anyway with Saudi Arabia at this point. Like Graham, I was just saying a little while ago, right, that Saudi Arabia has invested 35 billion in venture capital funds, right? And they have invested in tons and tons of corporations in the United States. It's far easier said than done to distance yourself from Saudi Arabia now. Because now it's a matter of breaking your fiduciary duty to your stakeholders and to your shareholders, because getting rid of Saudi means you're losing money as a company, which is literally the opposite of what you are brought on to do as, say, a CEO or a leading figure or a leading executive, right? Your whole point is the pursuit of profit. No matter where that pursuit of profit is going to lead you, into the arms of a dictator, that doesn't really matter to these people, as long as it means more profit. That's such a troubling mentality, and that's what's leading us down this path where Saudi can absolutely just swallow up whole sports organizations because it's in their mandate, unfortunately.
It's incredible, and its reach now is now bound. It is even, it's well not directly the same. If you look at something like climate change, you look at the COP meeting, and it's how the oil barons of the world have suddenly found themselves at the top of what is a global environmental meeting, and they're setting the agenda, and it's incredible. Like, in one sense, you kind of have to look on in awe of how quickly it's all happened, but in another sense, you kind of need to step back and say, what, like, how has it been allowed to have? It's insane. And then to jump again, and Karim, but this is probably the one we'll finish on with you, but like football, we've touched a little bit on the fact that it's extremely likely the World Cup is going to be there in the next decade. And if you look at it as well, then from the point of view, a lot of our listeners will be Premier League fans. Newcastle United is a story that is just, I mean, there's going to be books and books and books written about this one. It's incredible what's going on.
I think especially when we talk about the English Premier League, it's been in this situation long before Saudi came into the picture, though, hasn't it? Right?
Well, Man City as well, yeah.
Especially with Man City, right? Like, we've seen this as part of football's problem for a while now. Man City was the first example. As a matter of fact, really, I think people underestimate how much the United Arab Emirates as a country has really influenced. Let's put it this way. I really don't think there is a complex Saudi sports strategy right now had there not been a predecessor in the United Arab Emirates. As a matter of fact, I still think the UAE, particularly Abu Dhabi, is among the most cunning and competent examples of sports diplomacy, of sports strategy, and of sports washing. Right,
and so another one with an F1 race as well. Let's just
absolutely. So the F1 race. Hell, think of it this way. I mean, the UAE made jiu-jitsu a national sport, right? It's officially the national sport in the country, creating a significant cultural dynamic between the UAE and Brazil, of all countries, right? I mean, President Lula in Brazil was just there a couple of months ago, celebrating Mohammed bin Zayed, the president as well of the United Arab Emirates, saying that his visionary view of jiu-jitsu and elevating the status of the sport and bringing in all these Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructors to train, by the way, not just individuals in private gyms, not just the royal family, but to also train the police force and the military. So you think of how the UAE has viewed just how it can handle one sport. It can create sort of a national identity through this sport. It can use it to as a form of diplomacy and cultural exchange with other countries, right? It can use it to create to present itself in a prestigious way as a epicenter and a global center for combat sports, right? And at the same time, it's able to utilize this for its defense as an actual country and its police force and its military. That's one sport, guys, and that's not even the sport the country is best known for. Right. So when we talk, right, that's the thing. And when we talk, that's why sometimes the term sports washing bothers me, because it's such a limited scope of the scale of what's actually going on, right? When you talk about sports washing, you're just simply, at least this is the way I've always interpreted the term, we're really just talking about distracting from human rights abuses. We're really just talking about reputation laundering. That might matter to some countries. I'll tell you, it matters to Rwanda and Paul Kagame in Rwanda, for instance, right? It really does matter to him. There are some smaller countries that don't have the resources and the PR departments, let's just say, of countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and really the global influence too, right? They are powerful nations now on a political scale, not a sports scale, on a political scale. They don't need to hide who they are anymore. As a matter of fact, the UAE, the person who is known as the Jiu-Jitsu Sheikh in the UAE is Sheikh Tahnoun, right? Bin Zayed Al Nahyan. He's the younger brother of the current president right now. Sheikh Tahnoun is actually best known as the spy chief of the UAE. That's what he's really known for. And that's what one of the things the UAE is very well known for is this very advanced spyware that they use to bring down dissidents and to, hand over to the other dictators to bring down dissidents as well. The other country that's phenomenal at this is Israel, actually. And guess what? The third country that's great at this, Canada. So it's not like we're just talking about authoritarian regimes like the UAE being the most troubling countries in the world right now, right? We're talking about so-called democracies like Israel, right? And so-called democracies like Canada, right? So it's getting to a point now where I no longer want to look at the analysis of sports and politics solely through sports washing. I think it really is a crude and too simple of a way to analyze what's going on in the world and the extreme role that sports is now playing in all of this. I also think it's important now that we expand significantly beyond just authoritarian regimes and start holding other countries with the same critical eye that we've been doing so with Qatar and elsewhere, right? Like I wrote an article for The Guardian shortly after the Qatar World Cup ended saying, well, I'm very glad that all my colleagues have decided to join me in the coverage of sports and politics now, when a lot of people before said that there's no point doing this. You're more than happy to do this for Qatar. I hope you're going to do the exact same thing when the Olympics rolls around next year in Paris. Because let me tell you right now, France is not behaving like a Western democracy. France is behaving like an authoritarian regime in multiple ways, right? In absolute multiple ways here. Just to list a few. Most recently, we've seen them, have police violently disperse and attack peaceful protesters, who are demonstrating in favor of Palestine and just simply demonstrating against the acts of genocide taking place as well. That's not something that should be requiring, tear gas as a response. So it's really horrific when we think about the fact that France has banned hijabs for athletes. So that means no member of the France team can actually wear a hijab while they're competing.
It's absolutely crazy this day and age.
What is the logic? What's the logic behind banning the hijab for athletes? Like I know there was all the talk before of kind of, and I could be wrong on this could be just social media talk, but it was that piece around it's racist essentially. It's easy to hide a terrorist in a hijab kind of thing. But for an athlete, I just don't see any logic, rhyme, or reason for it.
Honestly, I don't think it really comes down to that at all. I think really France sees itself as a deeply secular country, and to the point that they're willing to take such radical stances to protect their so-called secularism, right? The problem is once you start oppressing others, as we have talked about this earlier, you're no better, right, than the people you're trying to stay away from or not be like. You're trying to say France has this whole big idea that it's simply trying to eradicate, extremism or orthodoxy and religion and stuff like that and protect itself. And one of the key elements of a democracy, as we all know, is the ability to have religious freedoms and the freedom to express your religion as well, as long as it's peaceful. But I don't see how a hijab is anything but a peaceful act.
Exactly.
And by forcibly removing hijabs from women, not only are you abusing women's rights, but you're also just generally just abusing religious rights and really just doing absolutely everything to prove that you are not a democracy at this point. Really, it's really, really disappointing behavior from France. Not to mention, I want to end on this just one last point with France, is that just a few months ago, France passed these really, really awful laws allowing for facial recognition software using AI technology, really abusive AI technology, to be used during the Paris 2024 games. Now, this was passed under the guise of security concerns and that to help protect the visitors coming for Paris 2024. Here's the real problem, though. It was passed without Parliament's approval. Macron passed it without Parliament's approval, and there's nothing suggests that it will actually stop following Paris 2024. The idea now is that under the guise of improving security for a sports event, France has actually now enabled AI-controlled facial recognition software as part of its just standard security in Paris and elsewhere in the country. That is a horrific precedent, and it really takes it one step worse when you realize that a lot of this software, unfortunately, has racial biases, and the AI software, the way it's trained, is trained to recognize brown and dark skin faces and see them as trouble, and you have a lot more false positives. This is something that's happened. This is why this technology has been tested, experimented, and withdrawn in a lot of countries, because they realize that there's still a lot of faults with them. Unfortunately, France has decided, nope, the positives in security outweigh the human rights concerns. Anytime a democracy does that, they lose that status of democracy, as far as I'm concerned.
Big time. And do you think as well, Karim, just as we were talking about Western democracies holding, I suppose, France with the Olympics, but then in the next World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, it's North America. So America isn't really, the USA isn't really a flag bearer of humanitarian, really, is it? I mean, given that it's a warmongering country, I mean, there will be documented criticisms. I'm hoping that there's going to be documented criticisms of America as that tournament approaches.
Oh my goodness, there's so much to criticize about the United States, from its domestic policies, from police brutality, and then we can get into its foreign policy approaches. We can get into the far right rhetoric of many of its politicians right now. I mean, the United States is currently trying to elect a Speaker of the House who is one of the far right politicians in the country, who was very much pro the insurrection that took place just a couple of years ago, right? So this is the state of the United States right now, not to mention for a country that has been arguing as well, and amongst lots of its journalists from that country have been arguing that we should not be going to Qatar because of the issue with gay rights in Qatar and the lack of respect afforded to LGBTQ plus people in the country. Well, then how can we not say the same thing about the United States, where in some countries they're simply excluding trans people entirely, and other places where there's simply no gay rights whatsoever? It's we seem to really think that the United States, because once upon a time it passed a gay marriage bill, that suddenly everything's okay and it's all roses now. It's absolutely not roses. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most, right now, 2023 in the United States is a terrible time to be a gay person, to be a person within the queer community at all right now. It is not a great time. So I certainly hope that all my colleagues out there who are so quick to jump on Qatar, rightfully so, mind you, speaking about these issues and about the restriction of human rights in any country is always something I'm going to be in favor for. But we need to always make sure that we apply that evenly across the board.
Absolutely. And that's something with your work, Karim, that I've been following over maybe the last 4 or 5 years, that it's really commendable, because you're so consistent. And anytime I read your articles, and I don't mind saying it because I'm a student of journalism, that I kind of fist pump. I kind of go on, Karim, that's how you do it. And I celebrate your articles a lot of the times because of how stellar the work is. So keep on doing that. And another one, I suppose one of the topics that you're covering, and I just wanted it'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up before we had your time, was on Ramzan Kadyrov, if that's how I pronounced it correctly. Is he dead or alive?
He seems to be alive. And you know what? I will never get over just how much in throughout my career, mixed martial arts has been a very strange and absurd lens that I've been able to view the rest of reality in the world from. And here's the way I can tell you this is actually true. Is I've been wondering for a while, is Ramzan Kadyrov alive or dead? I wrote an article about it saying, well, we aren't really seeing any footage. And then lo and behold, an MMA event takes place in Chechnya, sponsored and run by Ramzan Kadyrov, part of his ACA promotion. And guess who's sitting there on a raised dais watching the event? But Ramzan Kadyrov himself. He's alive, and the way we know he's alive alive is because he was in attendance at a live MMA event at the time. Make it make sense, Graham. Make it make sense.
It's mental. And then I love when you expose the MMA fighters that have done like special seminars within Chechnya, and it's like then they're posed the question: do you know about their lack of rights for the gay community, and they're always just playing dumb, and that they just accept the cash and stuff like that. So amazing, amazing work.
Well, thank you. You've got plenty of willful ignorance taking place in sports. And I mean, the UFC allows these athletes to get away with anything. There's no consequences to be faced at all, right? And the US government hasn't done much better in my eyes. I mean, there are sanctions out against Ramzan Kadyrov, is MMA promotion specifically as well, right? Yet fighters have still gone there and faced absolutely no repercussions, when the repercussions include very hefty fines and potential jail time. Yet nobody has faced any such consequence. Here's the kicker. We've got a UFC 294 event on Saturday, and the event features actually a co-main event between two of Kadyrov's favorite fighters. You've got Khamzat Chimaev, actually, who's currently his favorite fighter, right? And then you've got Kamaru Usman, a former UFC welterweight champion who has visited Chechnya at Kadyrov's behest not once, not twice, but 3 times so far, twice while he was champion, actually. And he went there because he would always visit one of Ramzan Kadyrov's children, one of his 3 sort of like elder sons. The middle one is called Adam. And Adam is a huge MMA fan, was a huge Kamaru fan. So every year on Adam's birthday, Kadyrov would invite Kamaru Usman, pay him tons of money, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, to visit Chechnya and just spar with Adam and attend his birthday party. This is what UFC fighters are turned into. They pretend that they're the baddest people on the planet, right? They pretend, but they are just simply puppets for warlords and dictators at the end of the day.
Time. And they don't have a moral. How are you expected for them to have a moral compass when their president was caught slapping his wife on camera? So I think that says it all.
No, I think it absolutely does say it all.
Absolutely. Karim, it has been a brilliant and fascinating chat with you this evening, man. Do appreciate your time so much. If people want to check out more of your work, they can go to karimzidan.com. And of course, we would highly recommend that they sign up to your newsletter, Sports Politica, as well, as Mero has already said. And I'll save you the embarrassment of gushing over your articles as well. But some of the reads are just absolutely brilliant, and they really, really do cut through that cross section of kind of where sports, politics, and all the other nitty gritty intertwine. So thank you for all the work you do on that, but thank you sincerely for your time this evening.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm more than happy to do this anytime. So you guys just let me know when it works out, and we'll continue this conversation again, because guess what? I don't even think we scratched the surface as of today.
Absolutely, no, definitely not.
And you'll be sorry for making that offer, because we'll definitely take you up on a crane. But until next time, man, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Graham. Have a good day.
You too.
Absolutely fascinating chat, and I could have spent hours talking to him.
Absolutely. And like, I mean, I didn't bring it up on it, but it wasn't lost on me that we were talking about, you know, F1 and football and professional wrestling, and, you know, talking about the elements of sports washing with these countries. But are we guilty of watching these?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
You know, and is that okay? Or is it a bit like saying, you know, the actions of Israel aren't the views of the Israeli people, a lot of the Israeli people, you know, so, you know, don't paint them in that brush. Is it's like that for spectators of these sports?
I think it is.
What can we do?
I think it is and it isn't. I think like you have very little choice. Well, you do have it. There's some people who argue you have very simple choice: turn off your telly.
Yeah,
but I don't think.
And then the argument that is you're only on Earth for a small space of time, and you want to enjoy yourself. So if I was never not going to watch the World Cup. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'm still able to say, here, Qatar, you're scum. Like
it's one of them where, and I struggle with it myself, because like that, like I love football, I love F1, I love and when I mean the reality of these things is that, as Karim pointed out, even the harshest critics of the likes of Saudi Arabia are now forced to do business with them because they have intertwined themselves in such a way that you cannot unravel it. It's a spider's web now.
Yeah.
And I think for if the world's powerful and elite can't unravel themselves from it, what hope has the average punter like you or I got?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and it's.
I'd love for them to go. I'd love for them to go after the sport of rugby.
I mean, listen, we've all said for years, Graham, that it's the elite in D4 that world rugby is ruled by. So, you know, but definitely it's one of them as well. And look, let's not shy away from the fact that we are only months away from the truth being unveiled about Tala Stadium and all the shenanigans that went on to get that developed and built.
Yeah.
Uncovering what is just a horrific regime full of human rights abuses.
Will we get the report out of how Ireland failed its 8th to get past the 8 World Cup quarterfinal in the rugby?
I can give
or is it just articles about being proud? And actually, I'm not going to point that at you because you're one of a very small minority that was calling this from the start, that Ireland would not progress after the quarterfinal. You've been saying it to me for about 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So what do you think of the articles of a sense of pride? We're proud of these men to fill these, as opposed to actual proper post-mortem. Why can't we get past the quarterfinal of a World Cup? As
I've said to you before, there is a toxic positivity in Irish rugby, and you are not allowed question or criticise unless you first bring to the table how our heroes in green done us proud and how they went out on their shields and all these other fucking waffly, bollocksy statements. The reality is very simple. We have a rinse and repeat method when it comes to Rugby World Cups. We blow our muck too soon, and then we don't know what to do with ourselves. If you look at the land, with the exception of 2007 and 2019, 2007 was an absolute disaster. 2019, it fell apart at the seams before we even got to the World Cup. Then Japan beat us in the group stages. We were left at the quarterfinal against New Zealand. New Zealand absolutely fucking tonked us, right? But if you take the examples of the years where we've supposedly been the best or among the best in the world.
Well, we're number one in the world now.
Exactly. Well, not anymore, we're not. But going into the tournament, yeah, we were. But again, if you look at it, right, so 2011, we beat Australia in the group phases and everyone lost their mind and thought this is it. Absolutely fantastic. We get to the quarterfinals. Wales absolutely fucking just do us in completely. You look at 2015, World Cup in England. What a one. I mean, if you're going to win it on enemy territory, because we're never going to get the host of World Cup again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We beat France in the group stages. Unbelievable. Amazing. Who do we go and lose to in the quarterfinals? Argentina. An embarrassment. Right? 2019, as I said already, a kip.
A known rugby stronghold.
Indeed. Well, in fairness, Argentina are a good rugby team, but I mean, like, no, just no. We should be making shite of Argentina every time we play them. Come up against them in a World Cup, and suddenly we're made of Play-Doh, right? 2023, we get a draw that is very favourable. South Africa, okay, yeah, that's a challenge. Scotland, respectfully to the Scots, we should beat them with 13
You didn't even enjoy the Ireland victory of South Africa.
No, because we were lucky.
There was a big asterisk over your enjoyment of that.
The only reason we beat South Africa is because of Razzie Erasmus, a.k.a. Paul Howard Doppelgangers, hubris and arrogance. If he had put his bullshit to one side and picked an actual 10, an actual kicker in the shape of Andre Pollard, who he has subsequently picked in games afterwards for a very good fucking reason, he recognised the writing on the wall. Ireland did not play well against South Africa. We stuttered and we stalled. Our line-out was a kip. I can't remember off the top of my head how many line-outs we lost, but we misfired countless line-outs against the Springboks. And the reality is, the only reason we got past them was because they fucked up. So, to summarise, South Africa lost that match more than we won that match. Right? That performance was enough to tell me my suspicions are correct. We absolutely will not be getting past the quarterfinal. By beating South Africa that day, we assigned ourselves to play New Zealand. Now, in recent years, we've got the upper hand on New Zealand. We are on paper right now a better team than New Zealand. But when you add in the World Cup factor, the quarterfinal factor, New Zealand wanting revenge factor, New Zealand always turn up in a World Cup. All
just the fact that it's New Zealand, I even know that.
Like, Ireland,
so what?
Yeah.
Nothing here. What you've said is positive. So, yes or no? Did Ireland have a good Rugby World Cup?
No, they did not.
And are we seeing, because on Monday I didn't see, or in the Sunday discussions or whatever, all I saw, now I'm sincerely asking to be open to be corrected here, but I didn't see any objective criticism of a review, or it was all, and I'm probably rightly so, it was like, congratulations Jonathan Sexton, well done.
Yeah.
Congratulations Keith Earls for return, well done. But there was no, look, I'm not asking for pitchforks. I actually ultimately don't care. But I'm just wondering, in regards to your comments about toxic positivity, is it actually completely just toxic and not objective to the performances?
No, I think it's somewhere in the middle, right? And I think we need to be more realistic in terms of, like, New Zealand they're not what they were, but they're still a very good team. And the reality is we should have beat them. Like, if there was ever a year to do it, this should have been the year. We are a very, very, very good rugby team. We're worse off now because we do not have Johnny Sexton any longer. But the reality here is that, and I can't remember which one the pundit said it, but one of them said it best when they said, if not now, when?
When?
Like, this was their 8th quarterfinal in a Rugby World Cup. We have not won a single half, never mind a match. We've never won a half. And so at a 40-minute interval, Ireland have never been in the lead in a Rugby World Cup. Right, that New Zealand game, twice they went down a man. We had a 20-minute period in that game where we had a man advantage. That's a quarter of the fucking match. And the scoreline in that 20 minutes, Ireland 7, New Zealand 3. You do not beat top-class teams like that. We weren't ruthless enough. For whatever reason, it just didn't happen. And you can have that. You can have days where you misfire. But I think when you look at the tournament as a whole, and you look at the fact that when we came up against top 3, top 5 opposition, both occasions, we misfired. We got past the Springboks by fucking miracle, as far as I'm concerned. But against New Zealand in knockout rugby, it wasn't to be found. And I think Ireland, if they're serious about the next World Cup phase, need to look at the mentality around that, and they need to ask themselves the question. I'm not saying Andy Farrell needs to lose his job. He's done an amazing job at Ireland. Absolute fair.
He's been there 2 years though, isn't he?
And another 2 years, 2025 his contract runs still.
No, but he's only there since 21, isn't he?
Sorry, yeah, he's only there, I think, yeah. And it's...
There was another hyperbole about Andy Farrell, which again, anytime I've seen him on interviews, I find them very easy to listen to. But talk about hyperbole. I mean, he's there since 2021 and people were comparing him to Jack Charlton.
I know, yeah, no, that's
disgraceful.
Yeah, in terms of hyperbole, yeah, it is. It's completely different worlds. It's completely, you can't compare. It's not like for like.
Not at all. Thanks for saying that.
What I will say about Andy Farrell is that he has built a very, very happy camp. The players love going into international camp now. And in that regard, you could maybe draw a comparison, because the players used to love going into camp with Jack Charlton, from what I've read and what I've heard, from the vast majority of them anyway, right?
Yeah. But I still don't think it's comparable.
It's not comparable at all. And rugby and a Rugby World Cup, even if we won it, would never have the cultural impact on Ireland the way Italia 90 did. And I'm saying that as a rugby
game
fan.
setting match. Game setting match. There you go.
But that's not to say it wouldn't be significant, right?
No.
I will say that. But the reality of all of this is that we've been knocked out of a tournament at the same stage 8 times in a row. It is a tournament which, in that sport, we are constantly ranked in the top 5. A couple of times we've gone into the tournament slightly lower than that. But for a team like Ireland, and for us to be a rugby nation, quotation marks there, to have never progressed to the final 4 is an embarrassment. And it needs to be looked at as an embarrassment. and we need to accept it. We need to own it. And if we're serious about rugby, we need to be willing to ask those hard questions about why do we keep falling short, and stop with this fucking nonsense, this absolute fucking stupidity around like, oh, well, you know, they were very brave and it was, oh, you know, the roll of a ball, the bounce of a ball, all that kind of stuff. No. They fell short, and they fell short because they weren't good enough. Why weren't they good enough if we're the best in the world? We went into it ranked number 1 in the world. Why did we fall short? And it's down to performance. And I think the question Andy Farrell has to answer is, did he do the right thing when he basically played his best players every match? The fatigue factor coming in, that is, and people try to downplay it and whatever, but I don't think so. I think in a tournament as intense as a World Cup, in a game as intense as rugby, you have to allow for that. And I think when you've got your big name players going in with over 200 minutes built up very, very quickly, fatigue is going to set in. Maybe that's it. I don't know, but maybe that's it. But either way, disappointment. And people, I think, need to take a bit of a deeper look at things rather than just calling people heroes and saying we went out on our shield.
Exactly. That's a great way to end their first episode back in about 6 weeks.
That was a fucking rant and a half. I wasn't expecting that.
It was good, and I want you to write it in the episode description, because it's a very good, honest description from a rugby fan, because it's the only honest thing I've seen online. Because anything else, it's like, oh, proud boots, but they should be proud, and proud this and proud that. Proud for what? Like getting to a quarter final? I mean, that's patronising the players as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that is the other side of it. I think rugby autobiographies as a general rule of thumb are shit, right? Yeah. I've read a lot of them, and they've been tough reads because they're just so bland. They are PR'd within an inch of their life, the vast majority of them.
Yeah.
I'd be shocked if one of those players does now an autobiography where in there's some sort of thing around the fact that it's not good enough, basically, to have fallen in a quarterfinal every time. Johnny Sexton genuinely is one of the best rugby players this country has ever produced, that the Northern Hemisphere has ever produced. He's a World Player of the Year. He is scintillating as a rugby player. And for him to have never got past a Rugby World Cup quarterfinal is a fucking blot on his career that he'll never be. In the same way O'Driscoll has the All Blacks asterisk that he never beat them, Sexton's has the World Cup one, and that has to be killing him.
Absolutely. Good way to end it. We're not back for probably another 2 weeks, but we are back with episode 300 of our long-standing podcast that's been going 8.5 years, with a few interruptions here or there in most recent times. But still, we're not going to stop doing the podcast, and we're going to keep doing it as frequently as we want. But
we're nearly 60 in dog years.
Absolutely. A big interview there. I enjoyed it. We will have more to come. We have another podcast joining us, an Irish podcast. The very former work colleagues of ourselves are doing very, very well.
Oh, is that across the line? Is that happening?
That will happen. That will happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So
lovely.
So we do have stuff down the pipeline. Don't worry, we will be back. But this has been What's the Story podcast 299. I've been Merrigan Mania. He's been Danjo Murray, and until next time,
here it is.
Full hearts.
Can't lose.
Who's sweet?
Yep.